talking about dealing with pressure, and we said last week, until you deal with the pressure inside of you, you're going to have a hard time dealing effectively with pressure outside of you. And today we're talking about the pressure that comes from your peers, how our peers have a huge influence on us, whether we like to admit it or not. And that doesn't go away when you get older. I mean, you could be, 60, 70, even in the nursing home. And peer pressure is still there because there are people that you want to please. There are people that have influence over you. And one of the challenges as believers is to say, hey, I follow Christ. I don't just follow the group. And religion says you need to believe these things and learn these things, and then you can kind of, be a moral person. But following Christ says, I'm going to learn what he would have me do based on the scriptures, and then I'm going to respond and follow him. And let me tell you, that's a huge difference in knowing what to do and then actually doing it. Sociologists did a study, and I love these studies because it kind of reveals some things about us. 10,000 students were asked, do you believe sex outside of marriage is right or wrong? And of the people that said, I think it's right, 23% said, hey, we're actually involved in sexual activity. Of the people said, I think it's wrong, 28% were actually involved in sexual activity. So there's a huge disconnect between their beliefs and what they were actually doing. You say, what does that mean? Well, not everybody that says, I'm a Christian, is actively following Jesus. And that's happening in our culture, of course, but it was also happening 2,400 years ago with the people of God in Israel. And in Jerusalem, God kept saying, hey, turn to me, follow me. It's not just about knowing about me. You need to know me and you need to obey me. And if you don't do that, I'm going to send someone to judge you. And he did that with Nebuchadnezzar. If you know about the scriptures, and you know that God sent a foreign country into Jerusalem to take it over, and broke down the wall and burned down the temple, and took some of the sacred items from the Holy of Holies back to their temple in Babylon. And with that, he took about 10,000 people hostage. And of those, 75 were young students that were beautiful and smart, and they took them and they put them in the school of the Babylonians for 3 years to learn about the Babylonian culture and how you need to respect all cultures and bow down to all these different gods. And so the book of Daniel is a beautiful story of how 4 young men were willing to say, hey, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow God. And let me tell you, we are living now in a Babylonian culture. I don't know if you realize that, but the Babylonian culture is simply this. It means, Babylon means a city devoted to materialism and pleasure. I mean, have you ever known a country that was more into materialism and comfort and pleasure than we are? And so how do you deal with following Jesus in a culture that's always pressing you into its mold, that's always trying to make you Babylonian? There's 2 things I want to share with you. And the first is you need to realize what Babylon is doing to you. And one of the things it's doing to you is it's taking away your identity. It says when they went to Babylon, the first thing they did is they took their biblical names. They all had biblical names. And they changed those names to make them Babylonian. They were saying, hey, your character is not important. What's important is that we take your identity and we move you in this direction so that you receive these kind of things as being the most important things to you. And these men were like, hey, you can change my name, but it doesn't change who I am. I'm a child of God. I'm made in his image. I am royalty. The second thing the Babylonian culture does is it tries to brainwash you mentally. And you probably get this if you've looked at social media very much, if you watch much TV. I mean, there's all kinds of messages that are bombarding you, that are indoctrinating you, saying, hey, you need to listen to the science. You need to listen to the culture. You need to do what you need to do. And of course, we know the truth is found not in culture, but in the Word of God. They offering you social status. Here's the thing about these young men, and all 75 of them. They were being offered an opportunity to sit at the king's table. I mean, they were among the elite. They were in the VIP. Can you imagine a 16-year-old kid? He's in Babylon. He's been taken there. There's nobody around him. He's being pressured. They're being pressured to buy into this culture and to have everything the culture says that you really need to have. And they refuse. Listen, the Babylonian culture that we're in switches the price tags. And here's the catch. When the music begins to play, and this is what happens in Daniel 3, and you have to go back and read it because we don't have time to talk about it. But in Daniel chapter 3, when the music began playing, everyone was to kneel down on the plains of Dura to a 90-foot statue. And here are these three men, and they decided, hey, I'm not gonna bow down to that statue. I'm not gonna be like everybody else. I'm only gonna bow down to God. Now, I think where this thing gets off with everybody is that you think, well, I'd never bow down to a false god or a statue. Well, here's the thing about our culture. It's not just statues, it's popularity, it's pleasure, it's power, it's comfort, where you and I are tempted to bow down before those things because, man, that's what our culture says you ought to do. Here's the second thing, is that you have to decide where you will draw the line before you face the test. And this is the amazing thing about Daniel. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, it says that Daniel resolved, Daniel decided, Daniel rehearsed not to defile himself with regard to the Babylonian culture. Here's the thing about drawing a line in the sand. If you don't have principles that you can stand on, you will fall for every proposition. Clint Eastwood said, a man's got to know his limitations. You got to know where you're going to draw the line. You got to say, hey, and with regard to sex, with regard to alcohol, with regard to my cell phone, with regard to, you can fill in the blank. As a follower of Christ, you're saying, hey, I'm not going to let the pressure of Babylon squeeze me into its mold. But back to Daniel chapter 3, the music begins to play. And you hear people all over the plain kneeling, whoosh, except for three young men, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. And I love that. It's the point of the book. One person with God in the middle of a Babylonian culture that's doing everything else under the sun. One person with God is a majority. And listen, the gospel is not sin management. The gospel is you're a new person. You have an identity in Jesus Christ. You've been set apart. You've been given the word of God and the power of God through his Spirit and the church of the living God. And here these guys are saying, we won't bow. We will not bow. Listen, I don't know what it is that you're challenged by to bow to. But we're reaching a time where we've got to decide, are we willing to follow Jesus, even if it means we have to face the fire? Because Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego said, hey, look, our God is able and he's going to rescue us, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow to your gods. Where in your life are you struggling to say, hey, I'm not going to kneel, I'm going to stand? Y'all talk about that. Have a few moments.